the day everything ended. The sound of rain filled the small office, a slow rhythmic tapping against the window that mirrored the storm inside Olivia's heart. The air smelled faintly of wet paper and old coffee, the kind of stale scent that clung to places where dreams came to die. She sat motionless in the leather chair, staring down at the divorce papers spread across the polished oak desk. The ink blurred before her eyes, the words swimming together as her vision clouded with tears she refused to let fall. The lawyer had stepped out to give them privacy, but the silence between Olivia and Julian felt heavier than any spoken word could ever be. Across from her, Julian sat with his back straight, his jaw tense, his expensive watch glinting under the office light. Once that same hand had held hers under starlit skies. Once his voice had been the sound of comfort and safety. Now he was just a stranger wearing a familiar face. He didn't look at her as she reached for the pen. Maybe he couldn't, or maybe he didn't want to see what was left of the woman he had promised forever to. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the pen, the metal cool against her skin. She stared at her name printed neatly beneath the line, Olivia Pierce. It looked like someone else's name now, a title from a life that didn't belong to her anymore. She took a deep breath and the faint scent of his cologne reached her. Clean, expensive, achingly familiar. For a moment, memories flooded back in sharp fragments. The laughter they shared when they first moved into their apartment. The way he used to whisper her name when they danced in the kitchen. The plans they made for a future that never arrived. And then, just like that, the memory shattered, replaced by the echo of countless arguments, of cold dinners and colder silences, of nights she spent waiting for a man who came home only when he was too tired to talk. Her pen touched the paper, and with each stroke of her name, something inside her broke. She didn't just sign a document, she signed away years of love, hope, and a part of herself she could never get back. When she finished, she set the pen down and stared at it for a long moment. Julian's hand reached forward, his movements mechanical, his eyes fixed on the papers like they were a contract, not the burial of a marriage. He signed his name without hesitation, as if this ending had already happened in his heart long ago. The scratching sound of the pen filled the air, sharp and final, like the sound of a door closing forever. When he stood up, Olivia looked up too, hoping for something, an apology, a flicker of hesitation, a single word that might make her believe this wasn't truly the end. But he only straightened his jacket, cleared his throat, and muttered something about sending her a final settlement. His voice was cold, practiced, distant. She wanted to scream, to tell him she didn't care about the money, that all she ever wanted was him, his time, his warmth, his love. But pride had always been her curse, so she simply nodded, her throat burning, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as he walked past her. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed like thunder in the small office. That single click was louder than any argument they had ever had. She sat there for a long time after he left, the world outside still weeping with rain. Finally, when she couldn't breathe anymore, she stood and gathered her things. Her reflection in the glass window startled her. She looked like a ghost, pale and hollow-eyed, the shell of the woman she once was. The receptionist gave her a sympathetic smile as she passed, but Olivia barely saw her. She pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the downpour, not bothering to raise her umbrella. The rain soaked through her coat in seconds, but she didn't care. She needed it. The cold sting on her skin, the feeling of something real cutting through the numbness inside. By the time she reached her car, her vision was blurry, not from the rain, but from the tears she had held back too long. She climbed inside, slammed the door, and let out the sob she'd been choking on for hours. Her body shook with it, the sound raw and broken echoing through the empty car. When the storm of tears finally slowed, she remembered something. The small white box in her purse. Her breath caught. For a moment she sat frozen, staring at it as if it were a ticking bomb. Then with trembling fingers she pulled it out. The pregnancy test. The two faint pink lines stared back at her, clear and undeniable. She let out a strangled sound, a mixture of laughter and despair. Life had the cruelest sense of timing. She was carrying the child they had prayed for, the one they had cried over after every failed attempt. And now, when everything was broken beyond repair, fate decided to give her this. She sat there for a long while, staring at the test, her heart torn between grief and wonder. She imagined what it could have been like, telling Julian, watching his face light up with joy, planning nurseries and names, laughing over baby clothes. But those images dissolved as quickly as they came. The Julian she once knew didn't exist anymore. The man who had once whispered that she was his everything was now too far gone, consumed by ambition and ego. He wouldn't believe her. Not after the bitterness that had poisoned every conversation in the final months. And even if he did, he wouldn't stay. Not truly, not the way she needed him to. Olivia tore the test into tiny pieces, her hands shaking as she watched them fall into the trash bag beside her seat. Each piece fluttered down like snow, like the ashes of a dream burned to nothing. She pressed a hand to her stomach, the smallest flicker of a smile breaking through her tears. "It's just us now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just you and me." It was the first promise she made to her unborn child, and one she intended to keep. That night she returned to the apartment one last time. The space felt alien, too quiet, too empty. The framed photographs on the shelves stared back at her like silent witnesses to the life that had crumbled. She moved through the rooms slowly, collecting her things, each object carrying a memory she didn't want but couldn't ignore. The mug he bought her on their honeymoon, the blanket they fought over during movie nights, the picture frame of them laughing under the string lights on their wedding day. She sat down on the edge of the bed and opened the photo album, flipping through pages that once told a story of love and belonging. On the last page, their wedding photo stared back at her. Two people smiling like they believed the world would always be kind. She closed the album gently and left it on the nightstand. Some things, she thought, didn't deserve to be carried into the next chapter. By dawn, the apartment was stripped of her presence. Only the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. Olivia stood at the door, looked around one last time, and whispered a quiet goodbye to the ghosts of who they had been. She turned the key in the lock, placed it on the counter, and walked away without looking back. The city was waking up as she loaded her boxes into the car. The sun broke through the clouds, its light cutting through the lingering drizzle, and for the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was there. A small spark in the ashes of everything that had fallen apart. Over the next few months, Olivia built a new life piece by piece. She found a small apartment in an older neighborhood, the kind where people knew each other's names and children played in the street. It wasn't the luxury she once had, but it was hers. She freelanced as a graphic designer, working late nights to keep up with bills and doctor appointments. Her body changed with every passing week, and though she faced each day alone, she did it with quiet strength. When morning sickness hit, she pushed through. When fear crept in, she reminded herself she was no longer the woman who waited by the door for someone who never came home. She was the woman who had survived heartbreak and was building something new out of its ruins. Rebecca, her best friend since college, became her anchor. She showed up with soup when Olivia was too tired to cook, sat with her during ultrasounds, and made her laugh when she thought she'd forgotten how. When Olivia doubted herself, Rebecca reminded her that she was strong, that this baby was not a symbol of loss but of renewal. And when the day finally came, when the cries of her newborn filled the hospital room, Olivia felt her heart expand in a way she never thought possible. The nurse placed the baby in her arms, and she stared down at the tiny face, the delicate nose, the soft pink lips, and the unmistakable green eyes that mirrored Julian's. She smiled through her tears. "Hello, Emma," she whispered. "Welcome to the world, my little miracle." For the first time in years, her tears were not from pain but from gratitude. Life had broken her, but in doing so it had given her something far more precious than what it took away. That night, as she held Emma close, Olivia realized something powerful. Sometimes endings aren't punishments. Sometimes they're the universe's way of pushing you toward a new beginning you never would have found otherwise. The life she built 6 years had passed, though at times Olivia could hardly believe how quickly the seasons had come and gone. The woman who once walked away from a broken marriage, clutching her stomach and a heart full of uncertainty, had become someone entirely new. Her mornings no longer began with arguments or tears, but with the soft giggles of a little girl who had become the light of her world. Their small home stood at the edge of a quiet street lined with maple trees that turned the whole lane into a river of gold every autumn. The air always smelled faintly of fresh bread from the nearby bakery, and children's laughter echoed through the neighborhood. It wasn't the kind of luxury she had once imagined her life would hold, but it was real, warm, and full of love, the kind that didn't vanish with the turning of a signature. Every morning, Olivia woke up before sunrise, her hair tangled from sleep and her heart already full. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen as she packed Emma's lunch. Small sandwiches cut into stars. A note tucked beside them with doodles that said, "Mommy loves you." Emma would stumble in moments later, her curls wild and her sleepy eyes blinking up with mischief, always carrying her stuffed bunny that had lost one ear long ago. "Morning, Mommy," she'd whisper, her voice a melody that could chase away every shadow Olivia had ever known. Together they'd sit by the small window that overlooked their garden, the first rays of sunlight spilling across the table. And for a brief moment, everything in the world felt exactly as it should be. Olivia had worked tirelessly over the years to rebuild her career from the ground up. What began as a few freelance design jobs from her laptop had grown into a modest but thriving design studio that served local businesses, authors, and even a few national clients who had discovered her through word of mouth. She worked late many nights after putting Emma to bed. Her creativity poured into each project with the same tenderness she gave her daughter. There were times she would look at her own reflection in the glow of the screen, surprised at how far she had come. Gone was the fragile woman who used to cry in the silence of her apartment, waiting for someone who would never return. In her place stood a woman who had learned that strength was not loud or boastful. It was quiet, steady, and relentless. It was the strength to start over when you had nothing left but hope. Emma was growing fast with a curiosity that sometimes left Olivia speechless. She asked questions about everything: why the stars twinkled, why the moon followed them home, why some people were sad, and why others seemed happy even with so little. Olivia often struggled for answers, but always found herself marveling at her daughter's gentle heart. Emma's laughter filled the house like music, and her imagination painted the world in colors Olivia had forgotten existed. Together they planted flowers in the garden, made pancakes on Sundays, and watched the rain fall while making up stories about clouds that fell in love. Every night when Emma drifted off to sleep with her bunny clutched close, Olivia would sit by her bedside and whisper silent prayers of gratitude, for the pain that had taught her strength, for the loneliness that had made her brave, and for the little miracle that had turned her life into something worth living again. Still, there were nights when silence carried ghosts. When Emma was asleep and the house was wrapped in stillness, Olivia sometimes found herself standing by the window, staring out at the faint city lights. In those moments, her thoughts drifted to Julian, the man who had once been her world, the man she had tried so hard to forget. She wondered where he was, if he had ever remarried, if he was happy. She told herself she didn't care, that she had moved on, that their paths were never meant to cross again. Yet deep inside, a part of her still carried the echo of what they once were: the laughter, the passion, the dreams they had built together before it all collapsed under the weight of pride and ambition. It wasn't love anymore, not in the same way. It was something quieter now, softer, a memory that no longer hurt but still had the power to stir something deep in her chest. One particular afternoon, the sky was clear and the air sweet with the scent of jasmine. Olivia was sitting on the porch, sketchbook on her lap, watching Emma play in the garden with their neighbor's little boy. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the air, mingling with the chirping of birds. The world felt beautifully ordinary, peaceful, fragile, complete. That's when the phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned at the unfamiliar number. For a moment she hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she said softly, expecting it to be a client. But the voice on the other end froze her blood. "Olivia?" The sound was cautious, uncertain, but unmistakable. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 6 years, one that her dreams had buried long ago. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The world around her seemed to fade until there was only that voice, rich and low, echoing across time. It's Julian." The name hit her like a wave. Her grip tightened on the phone, her heart slamming against her ribs. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. How could it be that after all these years, after everything, his voice could still reach the deepest part of her? "Julian?" she repeated, her voice trembling despite herself. "Why are you calling me?" There was silence on the other end, followed by a soft sigh. "I didn't mean to just call out of nowhere. I wasn't even sure you'd answer. I found your number through a mutual contact. I've been meaning to—" He stopped as though searching for words. "I wanted to know how you've been." Olivia almost laughed, but it wasn't a sound of humor, it was disbelief. How she had been. She wanted to tell him everything, to ask where he had been when she faced the world alone, when she was sick and scared and bringing their daughter into the world without him. but she swallowed it down. The years had taught her that some answers didn't matter anymore. "I'm fine," she said simply, her tone calm but cold. "I've built a good life. There's really nothing more to say." "I'm glad to hear that," Julian said quietly, his voice softer now. "You deserve happiness, Olivia." The sincerity in his tone made her chest ache. He hesitated before adding, "I was in your part of town a few days ago. I thought I saw you, near an elementary school. You were with a little girl." Her breath caught and her fingers went cold. The mention of Emma's school sent a sharp pulse of panic through her veins. "You shouldn't have been there," she said quickly, her voice rising slightly. "You had no reason to—" "I didn't plan it," he interrupted, his voice steady but urgent. "I was there for a meeting. My driver took a wrong turn. I saw you and her." There was a pause, then his next words came out almost in a whisper. "She looks like you, Olivia, but she has my eyes." The silence that followed was suffocating. Olivia felt her world tilt, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She tried to speak, but no words came out. All the walls she had built around her life began to tremble under the weight of the truth she had kept hidden for so long. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was mistaken, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was written in the depth of Emma's gaze, those unmistakable green eyes she had tried not to see every day. "Julian," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this." "I need to know," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "Is she mine?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at Emma through the window, laughing under the golden light, her curls catching the sun. "You lost the right to ask me anything 6 years ago," Olivia said, her voice trembling between anger and heartbreak. "You made your choice. You walked away." "I didn't know," Julian said, and this time his voice cracked, the first real sign of emotion she had heard from him in years. "If I had known, if you had told me, everything would have been different." Olivia closed her eyes, fighting the surge of emotion that threatened to break her. "You think so?" she said bitterly. "You were too busy choosing boardrooms over dinner tables. You wouldn't have noticed even if I had screamed it in your face." "I deserve a chance to know her," he said, almost pleading now. "Please, Olivia. Don't take that away from me." She didn't answer. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her chest aching as the years of buried pain rose to the surface. Finally, she whispered, "I have to go." She hung up before he could say another word. Her hands shook as she placed the phone down, her entire body trembling. Emma's laughter floated through the air again, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her mother. Olivia walked outside, forcing a smile, her heart heavy. She knelt down as Emma ran into her arms, smelling of sunlight and grass. "Mommy, look! I made a crown for you," she said proudly, holding up a ring of flowers. Olivia smiled through her tears, placing it gently on her head. "It's beautiful, baby," she whispered, holding her close. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Olivia sat by her bedside for hours, staring at her little face, so peaceful, so innocent. She thought of Julian's voice, of the years that had passed, of the secret she had guarded with every fiber of her being. The man who had once broken her heart now held the power to unravel everything she had built, and yet deep inside, beneath the fear and confusion, a small part of her wondered if this was fate's way of forcing her to face what she had run from for so long. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Emma's forehead. "I don't know what the future will bring," she whispered softly, "but I promise I'll protect you always." Outside, the wind carried the soft hum of distant thunder, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The peace Olivia had built so carefully was beginning to crack, and the past she thought she had buried was about to walk through her door once more. When the past knocked, the morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, painting delicate patterns on the wooden floor. The smell of pancakes lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sound of a children's cartoon playing on the television. It was an ordinary morning in every way that mattered, ordinary and precious. Olivia stood at the kitchen counter, her hair loosely tied back, her hands moving automatically as she spread butter across warm pancakes and drizzled honey for Emma. Her daughter sat at the table humming a song she had learned at school, her small feet swinging in the air, her eyes bright with mischief and innocence. There was a peace in the moment, fragile but complete, the kind of peace that comes when life finally feels stable after years of storms. Olivia had learned to cherish such mornings, to hold them like pearls in her heart, rare and priceless. But peace is a fragile thing, and that morning, with a single sound, it shattered. The doorbell rang. Once, twice, sharp, insistent, echoing through the quiet home. Olivia frowned, wiping her hands on a towel. It was too early for visitors, and she wasn't expecting anyone. For a second, she wondered if it might be a delivery or perhaps Rebecca dropping by unannounced, as she sometimes did. But something about the rhythm of the ringing made her uneasy. It was steady, patient, like someone who wasn't planning to leave. She glanced toward Emma, who was now curiously peering toward the door. "Stay there, sweetheart," Olivia said gently, forcing calm into her voice. She smoothed her hair, her heartbeat quickening as she walked toward the door. When she opened it, the world seemed to tilt. Julian stood on her doorstep. For a heartbeat, Olivia couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. It was as if 6 years folded in on themselves and time forgot how to move forward. The man before her looked at once familiar and completely changed. He was dressed simply. Jeans, a light blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. But the simplicity only made him seem more real. Less like the polished businessman she remembered and more like the man she had once loved. His hair was shorter now, streaked faintly with gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, signs of sleepless nights and quiet regrets. But his eyes, the same deep green that had once looked at her with a mix of tenderness and pride, were unchanged. And they were fixed on her now, filled with something that looked dangerously like longing. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Olivia found her voice, though it trembled when she spoke. "Julian," she whispered, his name tasting strange on her tongue after so many years. "What are you doing here?" "I had to see you," he said quietly. His voice was lower now, rougher around the edges. There was a gravity in it that made her chest ache. "I couldn't stay away. Not after what I found out." Olivia's fingers tightened around the edge of the door. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her tone firm even as her heart raced. "There's nothing left for you to come back to." But he didn't flinch, didn't turn away. Instead, he took a small step forward, his expression full of restrained emotion. "Please, Olivia," he said softly. "I know you don't owe me anything. I know I have no right to even stand here. But I need to know the truth." Her voice cracked, though she tried to keep it steady. "The truth?" she repeated. "You think you're ready for it after 6 years of silence?" Julian's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, the confident businessman she remembered flickered through. But it vanished quickly, replaced by something rawer, more human. "I saw her," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. "At the school. The little girl with the curls and the bright smile. She looks like you, but she has my eyes. Tell me I'm wrong, Olivia. Tell me she isn't mine, and I'll walk away right now." The words hit her like a blow. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Behind her, she could hear Emma's laughter echoing faintly from the kitchen, innocent and unknowing. Olivia turned slightly, as if shielding the child from the man on the doorstep, from the truth that hung heavily between them. She felt her heart twist in her chest. "You have no right to come here demanding answers," she said softly. But her voice trembled with the weight of tears she was trying to hold back. "You walked away, Julian, you left. I begged for you to see me, to fight for us, but you were already gone long before the papers were signed." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "God, Olivia, I know, and I've lived with that regret every single day since. I was blind, so focused on building a life that I forgot the one I already had. I thought I was doing what was best for us, but all I did was destroy the only thing that mattered." He paused, his eyes glistening. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want to know my daughter. I just want a chance to be part of her life." The word daughter struck something deep in Olivia. For years, she had guarded that truth like a sacred secret, keeping it hidden from everyone but Rebecca and her doctors. She had raised Emma alone, not because she wanted to keep her from her father, but because she couldn't bear to let the man who broke her heart do the same to their child. The thought of letting him in again terrified her more than she could admit. "You think you can just walk back into our lives and fix everything?" she asked, her voice rising now, thick with anger and pain. "You think a few words will erase the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering how I'd raise her alone? Where were you when I needed help? When she was sick? When the bills piled up? When I thought I couldn't do this anymore? You were gone, Julian, gone." He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, absorbing every word like a man who knew he deserved every one of them. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're right. I wasn't there, and I will never forgive myself for that. But I'm here now, Olivia. Please don't punish her for my mistakes. The sound of small footsteps broke the tension.
Mommy?
Emma's voice was soft and curious. Olivia froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned to see her daughter standing at the end of the hallway, her little face full of innocent curiosity. Her curls framed her face, her eyes bright as emeralds, the same green that had just shattered the man standing on the porch. "Who's that?" Emma asked, tilting her head. Julian's breath caught audibly. He looked at the child like a man seeing sunlight after years in darkness. His eyes softened and something in him seemed to crumble entirely. She's beautiful," he whispered, almost to himself. Olivia stepped slightly in front of Emma, her protective instinct flaring instantly. "It's just someone Mommy used to know," she said gently, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Go back to the kitchen, sweetheart. I'll be there in a minute." Emma nodded, her small voice cheerful as she said, "Okay." She turned and skipped away, humming to herself, completely unaware of how her very existence had just rewritten the air in that doorway. Olivia turned back to Julian, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You've seen her now," she said softly, her voice trembling but resolute. "That's all you needed, right? Now please leave us alone." Julian didn't move. He looked at her for a long moment as if memorizing her face, the determination in her eyes, the faint tremor of her lips, the way she stood between him and the little girl who had stolen his heart in an instant. "I can't," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "You can hate me for what I've done. You can shut me out, but I can't walk away from her. Not again. Don't you dare make promises you can't keep," Olivia said sharply, her composure cracking. "She doesn't know you. She doesn't need you. I've spent 6 years making sure she never feels the kind of emptiness I did after you left. Don't come here and destroy that." Julian took a step back, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't want to destroy anything, Olivia. I just want to be part of her world, even if it's from a distance. Please let me prove I've changed." Olivia's breath hitched, her heart warring between anger and the painful flicker of old love that refused to die. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. What she would say if he ever showed up again, how she would slam the door in his face and walk away without a word. But standing there looking at him, she realized that life was never that simple. He wasn't the arrogant man she remembered. There was a sorrow in him now, a depth that came from years of regret, and yet she couldn't let herself believe it. Not yet. Finally, she stepped back, her voice soft but unyielding. "You need to go," she said. "Before she starts asking questions I'm not ready to answer." Julian's lips parted as if he wanted to say something more, but then he simply nodded, his shoulders heavy with defeat. "I'll go," he said quietly. "But this isn't the end, Olivia. I'll find a way to make things right. For her, for you, for all of us." He turned and walked away slowly, each step echoing on the pavement. Olivia closed the door gently, her back pressing against it as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. She slid to the floor, the sound of her quiet sobs filling the small entryway. She didn't know what frightened her more, the possibility of Julian leaving forever, or the chance that he might actually stay. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She sat by the window long after Emma had fallen asleep, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. The world outside seemed calm, but inside her, chaos reigned. Julian's voice replayed in her mind, his words haunting her. "I can't walk away again." She wanted to believe it was nothing but guilt driving him, that he would fade away like a shadow by morning. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that something had changed, that fate had drawn him back not just for her forgiveness, but for something larger, something that might heal what had been broken. And though she didn't want to admit it, part of her heart, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be loved, was trembling with a hope she thought she had buried long ago. The bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. The days that followed Julian's sudden appearance felt like walking through a dream that refused to fade. Olivia tried to resume her normal rhythm, packing lunches, managing her clients, watering the garden, but everything seemed touched by a strange, electric awareness that she couldn't shake. The world around her had not changed, yet it no longer felt the same. Every familiar object, the worn mug on the counter, the photos on the wall, even Emma's laughter echoing from her room, seemed to carry an echo of the man she had once loved and the life she had left behind. It was as if his reappearance had pulled a thread she had carefully woven into the fabric of her peace, and now the whole tapestry of her life trembled, threatening to unravel. For 2 days she didn't hear from him. She had half hoped he would disappear again, that his visit had been a brief surge of guilt, quickly extinguished by the distance of time and the weight of his busy world. Yet each night, as she sat by the window after Emma had gone to bed, she found herself wondering where he was, what he was thinking, whether he had truly meant what he said, that he wouldn't walk away again. She hated herself for wondering. She hated that after all these years, her heart could still respond to the memory of his voice, the quiet sincerity in his eyes, the way he had looked at Emma, as if the universe had shifted beneath his feet. She had built her life on strength and self-reliance, on the conviction that she needed no one but herself and her daughter. But Julian's return had cracked something deep inside her, something she thought had long turned to stone. On the third morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't sent through email or courier. It came in a plain white envelope, slipped into her mailbox with no return address, his handwriting instantly recognizable even after all this time. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it, the weight of the paper far heavier than it should have been. She carried it inside, hesitated for a long moment, then finally tore it open. The letter was simple, written in his clean, decisive script. "Olivia, I know you asked me to stay away, and I will respect that, for now. But please understand, I am not trying to disrupt your life. I only want to know the little girl who carries half of my soul, even if it's only as someone she can one day know the truth about. I don't want to confuse her or take anything away from what you've built. I just want to be present, quietly, respectfully, in whatever way you allow. If you ever feel ready to talk, I'll be waiting. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to do right by the two people I should have never lost." Julie and Olivia stared at the words for a long time, her eyes blurring. She could hear his voice in them, steady, remorseful, genuine. It was a voice she remembered from years ago, before ambition hardened him, before the silence between them had grown unbearable. She wanted to hate him for being so calm, for writing with such control when he had shattered so much. But what she felt instead was something far more complicated. Sorrow, and beneath it, a flicker of compassion. He was trying in the only way he knew how, and that terrified her, because she didn't know if she was ready to let him try. That evening, she found herself walking in circles around the living room after Emma had gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. The letter lay on the coffee table, the ink glistening faintly under the lamplight. She picked it up again, tracing the words with her fingertips. 6 years ago, she had wanted nothing more than a single sign that he cared, a single effort that proved she wasn't invisible to him. Now, when he finally reached out with humility instead of pride, she didn't know how to respond. Time had changed them both, and she wasn't sure if the bridge between who they were and who they had become could ever be crossed. 2 days later, fate made the choice for her. It was Saturday morning, bright and clear after a night of heavy rain. The sky was a clean blue, the world washed and new. Emma was excited because her school was hosting a community fair, a small event with games, food stalls, and a petting zoo. Olivia had promised to take her, even though she had mountains of work waiting. She knew these were the days Emma would remember years from now, and she refused to let her daughter's memories be tainted by her own struggles. So she dressed in her favorite light sweater, tied Emma's hair with a yellow ribbon, and together they set off, laughing as they splashed through shallow puddles on the sidewalk. The fairgrounds were crowded with families, the air buzzing with laughter, music, and the scent of popcorn and cotton candy. Emma's face glowed with excitement as she pulled her mother from one stall to another, her energy boundless. Olivia found herself smiling more easily than she had in days, losing herself in her daughter's joy. For a while, the world was simple again. But then, as she stood near the face-painting booth watching Emma get a butterfly drawn across her cheek, she felt it, that unmistakable pull in the air, a familiar presence that made her heart stumble in her chest. She turned slowly and her breath caught. Julian stood across the field. He wasn't dressed in a suit this time, just a plain white shirt and dark jeans, but even from a distance, he carried that quiet confidence that had once drawn her to him like gravity. He wasn't looking at her, at least not at first. His eyes were fixed on Emma, who was now giggling at the mirror as the artist added sparkles to her butterfly. The look on his face was unguarded, filled with something Olivia hadn't seen in him for years. Wonder, awe, love. It was the expression of a man seeing something pure and beautiful for the first time and realizing it was his to cherish, even if he had arrived too late. Olivia froze, torn between the instinct to leave and the aching pull to stay. She didn't want a scene, didn't want to ruin Emma's day with emotions too heavy for a child's world. But before she could decide, Julian's gaze lifted and found hers across the crowd. The noise of the fair seemed to fade around them. For a long moment, they just stared. Two people separated by 6 years of silence and a few 100 feet of grass, bound by a child who didn't yet know how much history she carried in her smile. He didn't approach right away. He waited, hesitant, as if asking permission with his eyes. And though every part of Olivia screamed to walk away to shield the delicate world she had built, she couldn't move. Something inside her whispered that maybe it was time, not to forgive, not yet, but to face what had been avoided for too long. She nodded slightly, barely perceptible, but it was enough. Julian walked toward her slowly, his steps uncertain, his expression careful. When he stopped in front of her, neither spoke for several seconds. The sounds of laughter and music filled the space between them, but it all felt far away. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, though there was no anger in her tone this time, only exhaustion. "I didn't plan this," he said softly. "One of my investors sponsors the school's events. I didn't even realize this was where Emma studied until I saw her name on one of the prize boards." He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just couldn't walk away without saying hello." Olivia looked away, trying to calm the storm inside her. "She doesn't know you, Julian," she said. "You can't just appear out of nowhere." "I know," he said. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Olivia. I just want to see her smile. That's all." Olivia wanted to argue, to tell him that his presence would only complicate things, but then she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the same eyes her daughter had inherited. Something in her resolve softened, and for the first time, she let herself imagine what it might mean for Emma to know her father. Not the man who had broken her heart, but the man standing before her now, changed, humbled, trying. Emma turned at that moment, her face lighting up when she saw Olivia. She ran over, her butterfly cheek shimmering in the sunlight. "Mommy, look," she said proudly. "I have sparkles now." Olivia smiled and knelt to wipe a bit of glitter from her daughter's chin. "You look beautiful," she said softly, her eyes flickering briefly toward Julian, who stood a few steps away, watching the scene with quiet reverence. Emma noticed him then. "Hi," she said brightly, her natural friendliness breaking through the tension in the air. "Are you one of the teachers?" Julian knelt slowly, his smile gentle, his voice soft. "No, sweetheart," he said carefully. "I'm just an old friend of your mom's." Olivia's chest tightened at his choice of words. Simple, careful, respectful. She couldn't help but notice the way he looked at Emma, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. For a moment, all the noise around them seemed to fade, and the only sound was her daughter's laughter mingling with the quiet rustle of the wind. When they left the fair later that afternoon, Julian didn't ask for anything more. He simply said, "Thank you," for not walking away, and Olivia nodded without meeting his gaze. She didn't invite him to follow, didn't promise anything, but as she walked away holding Emma's hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something irreversible had shifted inside her heart. The light, after the storm weeks, folded into months, and time with its quiet persistence began to smooth the jagged edges that Olivia and Julian carried inside them. What had begun as tense, hesitant encounters slowly softened into small human gestures that neither of them had planned. Julian never forced his way in. Instead, he appeared at the edges of their world in ways that felt almost accidental, donating books to Emma's school library, helping repaint the playground fence on a volunteer weekend, or sending anonymous flowers to the art show where Emma's drawings hung. Each act was quiet, careful, full of a humility that Olivia had never seen in him before. She noticed even when she pretended not to. She noticed the way he knelt to tie a child's loose shoelace at the fair, the way he lingered to help the elderly janitor carry boxes, the way he looked at Emma as though he was memorizing every breath she took. Somewhere along the way, her anger began to lose its sharpness, replaced by a strange, cautious peace that frightened her as much as it comforted her. For Emma, the world was simpler. She had taken to Julian with the open heart of a child who saw kindness before history, To her, he was Mr. Jules, the friendly man who told funny stories, who drew silly animals on napkins, who never seemed to mind when she asked 1,000 questions in a row. Olivia watched them sometimes from the kitchen window, Julian sitting cross-legged on the grass while Emma showed him her latest art project, the two of them laughing as though the years of separation had never existed. Those moments tore at something deep inside Olivia. She had raised Emma to be strong, independent and unafraid of love, yet now she found herself terrified of what love could do if it broke again. And still, each time she saw her daughter's laughter mirrored in Julian's eyes, the fear melted a little more. The first real conversation between them came one evening when the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of honey. Julian had offered to fix the squeaky hinge on the garden gate, a task Olivia could have done herself but allowed because, for reasons she couldn't explain, she didn't want to send him away. He worked quietly while Emma chased fireflies across the yard, her laughter floating through the warm air. When the hinge finally gave its last creak and fell silent, Julian wiped his hands on a rag and looked up at Olivia, who was leaning against the doorway, her arms crossed more for balance than defense. "You always did hate that noise," he said, smiling faintly. She nodded, and for the first time in years they shared a silence that wasn't heavy. "Emma's happy," he said softly. "You've done an incredible job, Olivia." Her eyes met his, guarded but grateful. "She's my whole world," she said. "I can see that," he replied. "And I'm not here to take any of it away. I just want to belong to it, even a little." His voice carried no demand, no entitlement, just quiet longing. Something inside her, something she had locked away since the day she signed those papers, stirred painfully. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You can't erase the past," she said. "I'm not trying to," Julian murmured. "I just want to live better in the future." That night, after he left, Olivia sat by the window long after the house had gone still. The moonlight spilled across the floor and she found herself thinking about forgiveness, not as a gift to him but as a release for herself. Holding on to anger had once given her strength, but now it only kept her tethered to pain. She realized that maybe the bravest thing she could do was to stop fighting the memory of what they had lost, and start accepting the possibility of what could still be saved. As autumn arrived, their fragile coexistence grew into something steadier. Julian began joining them for Sunday breakfasts, always bringing fresh pastries from the bakery that Emma adored. Sometimes he would arrive early and help Olivia prepare the table, their movements awkward but gradually easier, like dancers relearning old steps. They talked about Emma, about work, about nothing and everything. Slowly, laughter returned between them, hesitant at first, then freer. One morning, as the first snow began to fall, Olivia caught him watching Emma through the window as the little girl pressed her palms against the glass to feel the chill. There was such tenderness in his expression that it broke something inside her. In that instant, she understood that the man she had married had not vanished. He had simply been buried beneath the weight of his own mistakes. It wasn't a single moment that changed everything, but a collection of small ones. The way he showed up without being asked, the way he listened without defending himself, the way he spoke about the past, not with excuses but with regret. And one evening, when Emma had gone to a sleepover, Olivia found herself pouring 2 cups of tea instead of 1. Julian was sitting at the kitchen table, looking around the room that had once only existed in his imagination. "You kept this place warm," he said quietly. "I used to picture you somewhere colder." She smiled faintly. "I was for a long time," she admitted. He looked at her then, really looked, and said, "I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry for every night you felt alone." Tears welled in her eyes unbidden. She set the cup down and took a deep breath. "You can't undo what happened," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But I can be here now, if you'll let me." The truth of it was so simple, so disarming, that she couldn't answer. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his, a small human gesture that spoke louder than forgiveness itself. For the first time in years, the silence between them didn't hurt. It healed. Winter deepened, and with it came the kind of peace that feels hard-earned, like sunlight breaking through after endless storms. Emma began calling Julian Dad without prompting one snowy morning, and Olivia didn't correct her. The word hung in the air like a benediction, soft and miraculous. Julian's eyes filled, and in that moment Olivia knew that no matter how imperfect the path that had brought them here, They had finally arrived at something honest. Months later, on a crisp spring evening, Olivia stood in the garden watching Emma chase the new blossoms that had begun to open after the rain. Julian came to stand beside her, their shoulders brushing lightly. The scent of wet earth and lilacs filled the air. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" he asked quietly. "All the time," she said, smiling faintly. "I used to think the end of us was the worst thing that ever happened, but maybe it was just the beginning of who we were meant to be." Julian turned to her, his expression full of the same wonder he'd had the day he first saw their daughter. "You were always the stronger one," he said. Olivia shook her head. "No," she whispered. "We both had to break to learn how to love right." The last of the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, and in that soft light they stood together, not as the broken couple who once tore each other apart, but as two people who had finally learned that healing is not forgetting the pain, but growing beyond it. Emma ran toward them, her laughter bright as bells, and when she wrapped her arms around both of them, Olivia felt something she hadn't felt in years: completeness. Life had not given her the story she expected, but it had given her something far rarer, a second chance that had been earned through tears, courage, and the quiet grace of time. As the evening breeze whispered through the garden, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply, grateful for every scar that had led her back to this moment. Because sometimes the most beautiful endings are simply new beginnings disguised as forgiveness.